So we're excited this afternoon. This first panel is going to kick off the rest of the Hunger Symposium this year. Last night we heard some from Roger Thurow through the eyes and stories of a number of farmers, smallholder farmers in Western Kenya, some of the challenges that face smallholder farmers' decision-making. This particular panel then is going to be looking at some of the ways to resource smallholder farmers for increasing productivity. And so without further ado, let me turn the panel over to Dr. Chris Keil, Professor of Environmental Science.
Welcome again to this panel entitled Small-Scale Farming in the Information Age, Increasing Yields Through Education, Research, and Communications Capacity. We will have three speakers, Spicka, Dr. Paul McNamara, and Roger Thurow will speak again. I will introduce each of them a bit more before they make their presentation, because I found that if I have all the introductions and bios in the beginning, I forget what goes with what by the time they get up here. Format will be about a 15-minute presentation from each, and then after all three have spoken, we'll move up to the stage for a question and answer period. Our first speaker is Spicka. She's currently project manager in the Corporate Citizenship Center of Excellence at John Deere. She has extensive experience in high technology, sales, and new market expansion, as well as customer acquisition, market entry strategies, business development, and nonprofit sector project management. In addition to holding an MBA from the Tuck School of Business at Dartmouth, she holds an MS in Mechanical and Aerospace Engineering from the University of Minnesota and a BS in Mechanical Engineering from India. Her research in nanoparticle synthesis has been published in acclaimed scientific journals. She's volunteered for microfinance organizations working in Ghana and consulted to develop a sustainable economic development strategy around archaeological treasures in Jordan, and is a junior achievement volunteer. We look forward, Sri, to what you have to share with us this afternoon.
Good afternoon, everybody. I am Sri Spicka, and thank you very much for the kind introduction. And I also want to start out by saying I'm thoroughly impressed from our morning chapel today. So whoever was there, amazing. Okay, so we'll have 15 minutes. And as in the introduction we mentioned, I'm the project manager in the John Deere Foundation. And we have started a new initiative in the foundation. So I'll talk about my project and how we are managing it. There are three pieces to it. There is world hunger that we are trying to address, but also education and infrastructure. So today's presentation, I'll focus on the hunger piece, but if you have questions on how we are addressing education and how that is an integral part, I'll answer during the Q&A. Okay, so as you see here, the project is called Joint Initiative for Village Advancement. So it's joint because we wanted to empower the villages, but not help, not aid. We want to empower them. So that's why we call it joint initiative, and the joint piece is John Deere employees, the foundation grants, the local nonprofits, and the villagers. So everybody is working together to make this happen. Next slide, Chris, thank you. I'll start with giving you a location of where this project is actually happening. So this is in Rajasthan, India. So many of you may be familiar with Udaipur, which is a big tourist attraction. Rajasthan is in the northwest side of India, just the state bordering Pakistan. And the northern half of that state is completely desert, so no agriculture happening there. It's sand dunes. So the southern half is where our project location is, and it's a very semi-arid area, so really the rainfall is very uneven and minimal, and so they struggle but they're an ag-based society, so there's a lot of struggle that they go through. And so this project location was selected because of that, and also because we have some existing relationships with the universities there, so we are familiar with the area, but also that the girl child in that area suffers a lot. So education piece is something that we are keen also in, and so we thought we can make a difference in many different areas in this location. So one other thing about Rajasthan, it has the lowest literacy rate in India. So India is making a lot of progress in making the population literate, but Rajasthan lags behind there, and women really lag behind in that area. So the 3 villages are listed out here, as you see. Sakravas, Madara, and Mora are the 3 villages that we are addressing, and the overall population of this total population would be around 6,000 people. Next slide, Chris. Okay, so just a little background about why John Deere is doing this in this, in this way, in this fashion. So John Deere Foundation has existed for over 50 years, and we make a lot of, lot of grants and a lot of different projects that we're involved in and sponsor. But we are very much a nonprofit 501c3 arm of John Deere, so we don't do anything that is around product related. But we are more interested in employee engagement, attracting great talent, but also being, a good citizenship. So we want to do the right thing. So that's how the foundation was formed. That's how they've worked throughout the last 50 years or so. And this picture here shows our CEO, Sam Allen, in September 2011. He's right there in the back in glasses. Along with his, about top 20 of his leadership team, he went to Rajasthan, India, to these villages. And he wanted to work on the fields. He wanted to engage with them. It was a volunteer experience for them. And it was a very low-key engagement. And they worked on the farms with the women. They cut wheat. They used their sickles. They built mangers and tried to really understand what they go through in their life, but also what women really go through in their lives in these areas. So when they came back from this experience, immediately there were obviously, anybody who goes to India wants to help, right, in these villages. So they personally made their own contributions and started working in these villages in their own way, but they also asked the John Deere Foundation to figure out, is there something we can do, And that's the tricky part. So if you go to the next slide. So now we know we want to do something, but what is it that we can do to make an impact? And we don't want to make a short-term impact. We want to do something which will last for generations. So that's why we are focusing on a small area. That's why we're trying to understand how that impact can be made. So if you see this graphic here, the central circle is the basics. So Roger talked about hunger yesterday. These villages that we are addressing, they do go through that erratic cycles of good crop, bad crop, but they're a society, and in India, they really help each other. So if somebody's crop is not doing well in one season, the community really helps. So we didn't see hunger. We didn't see the issues of lack of shelter. We didn't see leaking roofs. We didn't see, complete lack of clothing, anything like that. So basics, they're okay. So what is the next step? How do you help beyond that? So we are not focusing on aid. We are focusing on empowerment. So we want them to come to the outer circle. We want them to be self-reliant. We want them to be not rain-dependent, not dependent on erratics of climate change, any government policy change, anything like that. We also want them to break out of the cycle of poverty that they're in. And the way I think about it, and you meet these children, you want them to be able to dream, to aspire for something new, something different, than all of them doing exactly what their parents and grandparents did, even though they want to do something else. And that does not mean they go out of the villages into the cities, but really manage their farms better, get more value for what their money is, what their produce can bring them for them in terms of financial input. So that's where we are trying to do. And the way we think we can achieve that is intervening in these 3 areas of infrastructure and quality of life, so sanitation, water, drinking water access, basic health, and also for food and income security. So that's really focusing on the ag productivity piece and education. So another piece of it that we did, which is new also, is we wanted to go and talk to the villagers first before saying, or the farmers, before saying this is what you need to do. We think that they're very smart people. They've been really surviving for the past 500 years or so, following some incredible ways of sustaining their life. So they're self-sustaining. They're not, they can choose what's right for their lives. So we didn't want to dictate and say, you got to use this fertilizer. We wanted to ask them, where do you need help? So we came back with a lot of insights from that trip. So that was in September. We spent 2 weeks, and we did all sorts of focus groups. And you have to get, in some focus groups, we had to separate the men from the women. We were like, no, the women can't open up. You guys have to go away. And the women would then take off. They cover their faces with these veils, and they would take it off finally, and we could see their faces. And I was so happy, thank God, that I could speak Hindi. I'm from South India, and I'm one of those few South Indians who learned Hindi, and I was so happy to be able to and do that and interact with them. And most of the time, they just wanted to get me married off to somebody in the village, but at least that opened up the conversation, and they really told us what it is that is really going to make a difference in their lives. So, of course, along with the women, we talked to all stakeholders, the farmers, large farmers, small farmers in the village, different village heads. So you have local governments in India, so they're called panchayats, and you have a sarpanch. So sarpanch is the head of the local government, and it's usually a woman can be in the role, but she doesn't really speak up. So the husband kind of runs the government there, and we got all of them to talk to us. A lot of the district officials do what they're trying to do, so that we don't reinvent the wheel, but we also find out what's the missing. We did a gap analysis basically, what's missing and where we can intervene. So, and the children, they were so articulate, so they can tell you what exactly we need to do. So we did all that. And the next slide, Chris. And so this is what came out. This is the only chart I will put up there from my MBA training, but it's a bubble chart that came out where we can now prioritize what to do in year 1, year 2. So this is a long program. We came out with thinking that's a 5-year program. In year 1, we're going to address what are the immediate needs that they have. So all the male farmers, we ask them questions. What are your top 3 priorities? List them out. And soil testing comes out as number 1. So we are going to figure out how to do soil testing, but there's also a next step to that, where an extension worker will work with the farmers and educate them on the results of the soil test. And what do we do in, knowing that information, how do you make changes to what you're doing? What changes you need to make in terms of seed, even do you need to put cotton versus something else for your field? And do you also need to change your way of applying fertilizer? Most of them are just sprinkling urea. Anywhere. Doesn't matter when and what. And there's a lot of the bottle cap system is not used. They hand sprinkle. So, there's different ways that we could intervene. And then women, of course, wanted good quality of teachers for their children. So, and sanitation. Those were the 2 top things that came out. And then we also thought we don't need to address drinking water if the government is doing it, and we thought that they are. So we now have prioritized based on what the community needs. And we continue to engage the communities throughout the project. So every 6 months or so, we find out, has anything changed? India seems to change a lot very frequently. So we try to keep them engaged. The next slide. So I will focus on the agriculture piece and what we found out. So we found out a dichotomy that they do many things which are actually really modern or something that we maybe in the developed world are coming back to. So efficient nutrient management. So they're very good about cropping with 2 different crops that can grow together. So they'll put soy in between maize. They'll put a vegetable in between wheat so that they can also sustain themselves and they can get that balanced nutrition as well. That's their goal. So they're doing that. And also we saw a John Deere water irrigation plant in one of the villages, which was completely unexpected, but they had gotten it and then installed it, and some of them are going into drip irrigation because it's a very arid location, and drip irrigation, is the best solution for them. They can't afford it. There are subsidies that exist, but most of them are not literate enough to even fill that subsidy form. So the bureaucracy is something that they're not able to go through. So through our extension worker, we hope to help them get those applications in and get that subsidy to actually implement the drip irrigation. But also we found, as you see in the bottom half of the slide, there are some imprecise practices that are going on. So the row cropping practice is not at all in there. So they can, Roger mentioned yesterday about how they sprinkle maize, and this is something similar. They just, put it wherever, however it works. They don't measure how you plant your maize seed after seed, things like that. And it's not a modern technique even. It's something, 50 years old here probably, but that needs to come there. And driving adoption is something we focus on because just informing and educating is not going to make the change. So we are planning demonstration plots so that they can actually see the difference for themselves. Because I always think, if I was in their shoes, it's my bread and butter. I'm not going to make changes until I'm sure about it. What if I use a fertilizer and my crop is gone? I'm not going to come and save them at that moment, right? So they don't trust you, and you got to build that trust through demonstration plots and many other ways. So we continue to do that. And the primitive weeding techniques is something that we are addressing as well. That's okay. So as I mentioned, Roger mentioned the same things that One Acre Fund is doing, but we are also we are launching it right now. It's probably starting to take off right now, as we have on-the-ground staff who are going to start the soil testing and water testing. We have many farmers coming forth with samples and saying we would like this done. We have appropriate inputs, so we're trying to look at what is locally available in terms of seeds, fertilizers, pesticides, what works in that area, and how we can educate them to use them properly. The cropping practices, of course, so we have an ag specialist who will work through the local agriculture university to help them. Storage, as we all know, it's very important, and market access, so they can get the best value for their produce. And the John Deere volunteers. So we have many volunteers. We have big operations in India, and all the people, all the employees are super excited about this project and do want to volunteer. So they have developed ag curriculums, ag training curriculums. There are specialists who understand how to introduce basic mechanization that helps these individuals be better, more productive. So we're always incorporating our talent into this project. Next slide. Okay, I just will finish off with 2 quick case studies. Are we okay on time? Okay. So very quick 2 case studies, which I thought were incredible. Small changes, but they just make you feel so good. And the farmers are super happy about this. So we worked with a university there. We have something called a technology resource center. See, these resource centers are in each of the villages, and we have basic mechanization tools in there. So these are not, most of them are not machines, so they are really a better form of sickle. So the sickles they were using were heavy, and they didn't have any sharpness to it. So a lot of pressure on your wrist to do, and the women do a lot of these tasks. I was very surprised, and being from India, I probably thought I should know everything, but I really didn't know that the women do everything on the farm, at home, to raise their children, and they just work so hard. So we wanted to alleviate that drudgery and help them with their health issues. And so just giving a sickle, which is lightweighted with a sawtooth sharpness to it, that doesn't deteriorate every time you cut the weed. We gave a toolkit out to them with these basic tools, and it just helped them so much. But this one here is a cotton stalk puller. So the hands picture, it's hard to see, but this shows an improvement. Her hands were completely scratched because typically cotton is harvested 4 times or so in a season. And at the end, you are ready to pull it out. So you pull out the cotton stalk itself, and then you may plant, you plow and plant another crop, maize or wheat usually. So cotton is planted in the summer season in this area. So when they're pulling it out, they rip off the stalk, first of all, and it takes them about, he said one day for 7 biga. A biga is a form of measuring land there, so it's about 0.6 acres. So it's a small piece of land, and it takes about, a lot of time to do it for them, and now it's reduced it almost like 400% in terms of time. And the really cool part, which we didn't even know, is that when they used to pull the stalks out, if they have to come 5 days, they would just leave the stalk there and go home and come back the next day to pull the rest of it out. And that takes 5 days to do that. But in the meantime, if it rains, that's it. They lose all their, the quality goes down for their cotton. And that's something they don't have to face now. They hire somebody who can take their produce from the field at the end of the day. So they use this cotton stalk puller. It's like a little lever-based mechanism. The lady puts her leg on it, squeezes those 2 levers, and the stalk comes out. And it comes out through with the roots, so there's no after work that they have to do as well. If you look at the next slide, another example, this is a battery-operated sprayer. So previously, they had a manual-operated sprayer that they would use. And so it was very uneven to spray. So every time you pull the lever, a big chunk would fall out or spray out. And then, again, the next plant may not get the pesticide. And then also, it's a hugely labor-intensive work that they had to do and time-intensive. And so using this battery-operated, and this is a 4,000 rupees intervention. And we actually rent it out for 10 rupees per day. So to give a context, 4,000 is about $80 for actually buying it, and 10 rupees, I don't even know, 2 cents. So that's about how we are renting it out to these farmers. And what's interesting is women used to do this, and men took it over because it's so cool for them to use it now. So you see a male farmer, and the women are super happy that their work is being shared, But that's one intervention. And then I just want to show you guys one other thing. Yesterday, we saw a maize deshelling thing that was happening in homes in Africa. And similarly, in India, they sit down in the evenings, and everybody starts peeling the maize grain out of these dried corn. And the interesting thing is that when you do it with hand, it doesn't come off properly. So sometimes the shell breaks. And so now we gave this out in their free toolkits. It's a maize sheller, and It's developed mostly in the universities in India, these products, and we source manufacturers to make them and house them in these technology resource centers. And women walk in and they can take it when they need. These things we gave out to 500 women, but they're available for others to use. And it's 75 rupees, so that's under $2. They take it, and now they're getting much more value for their product, because when you use this, this instrument, it works for both thin, like small corn, and also big corn. So it is very ingenious. That, being an engineer, I can't help marvel at this. But if you see it, it goes for a smaller side. It has a smaller thing, and then you can put a bigger maize on the other side and just de-shell it. It comes off perfectly. I don't want to make a mess here, but I tried it, and each shell is perfectly in perfect shape. So, and they get a great value out of it when they sell it out in the, with the middleman or whoever takes their products. So, these type of interventions is what we're working on, and we continue to move forward with the plan, and hopefully. In 5 years or so, we will make a huge difference both in ag productivity, but also we want to keep the youth engaged through education and vocational training. So happy to answer questions afterwards. Thank you.
Boy, panel discussions are challenging, because I just want to hear more and more. Our next speaker is Paul McNamara. Dr. McNamara is an associate professor in the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Economics, the Division of Nutritional Sciences at the U of I at Urbana-Champaign. He serves as the director of the USAID-funded Modernizing Extension and Advisory Services Project, which works with its consortium members and other partners to strengthen agriculture and nutrition extension services around the world with the goal of increasing smallholder economic and food security. He also serves as an extension specialist with the U of I Extension and has garnered team and individual awards for his extension efforts. His research, outreach, and teaching efforts are in the areas of consumer economics, health economics, agricultural economics, and extension. He holds a PhD from the Department of Applied Economics at the University of Minnesota and holds a Master's of Public Policy from the Harvard Kennedy School. He received his BA in Economics from Wheaton College, Illinois, and here he was a member of the Hunger Program, and he did his hunger internship in the Philippines. Since his hunger internship, Dr. McNamara has been involved in international development activities in the Gambia, the Philippines, India, Uganda, Sierra Leone, Liberia, Ghana, Nepal, Mexico, Honduras, and other countries in the context of international development, research, education, and business. Dr. McNamara.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for that kind introduction. It's really fun for me to be back here. I love the Hunger Program. One of my most fun experiences last year was going back to the site of my hunger internship and visiting with the project director who hosted me, Mars Forte, and seeing Mars. He's an older gentleman now, and I'm older, and they said, "Oh, you've gotten bigger," and I haven't gotten any taller. Anyway, that's what happens 30 years on average for American males. But it was so fun to see him and see other people, even tribal leaders came down to see me from Bla'an Tribes Leadership Council, and we had a great time, and I got to speak at a Bible school in General Santos City. It was just a real highlight for me. The Hunger Program's made a big difference in my life. I'm going to speak about reaching farmers with agricultural extension services. And why is this important? There's a big gap in between technology and smallholder farmers. There are a lot of existing technologies we know about. They're out there, and they're just not getting into farmers' hands. Farmers aren't aware of them. The technology diffusion doesn't happen magically. We had connections with a project in Congo, for example, where they're along the corridor where EFAD and FAO distributed blight-resistant cassava shoots for dissemination. But if you go 15 miles past the main road in Bandundu, you will hardly see any of the blight-resistant cassava cuttings being used. The technology dissemination in many places doesn't happen sort of automatically. It takes real work. It takes real farmer experimentation. to investigate new methods and think about them, and so extension is a big part of it, and yet a lot of our approaches to agriculture are heavy on technology, but are, in my opinion, a bit weak on reaching farmers. That's why it was exciting to hear Roger talk last night about the Acre Fund approach, and there are many other approaches. And I'm going to mention a couple today about information and communication technologies, particularly, and how that can address. My title's Lessons Learned from ICT for D, Information Communication Technology for Development, ICT for D, Agricultural Extension Applications. I direct the MAIS project. It's a $9 million project funded by USAID. It's a Leader with Associate Award. And we have some experience with a number of different ICT for D projects that I'll talk about and derive a couple lessons for us here today. So extension, we see it as critical. And increasingly in policy circles, people like the World Bank, people like ministers of agriculture are realizing how weak extension is in many countries and how great the need is. And I'll talk a little bit about what I mean by extension in a second. And the World Bank, in a document about the agricultural potential of sub-Saharan Africa, wrote, "A major and as yet unresolved challenge is to develop cost-effective and demand-driven advisory services," they mean extension, through effective partnerships among farmers, public agencies, and civil society. It's something we really don't have a good handle on at the system level, and that's the perspective that I'm taking here today. So what I'm going to talk about real briefly about MAIS, the project I direct at the University of Illinois, our engagements in ICT for agriculture extension, and derive a couple lessons out of our experience. MAIS, we're a knowledge consortium around agricultural development. We are university-based, but we have other partners, including Winrock, IFPRI, Catholic Relief Services is a very active partner of ours, Cultural Practice, SAFE, and Sasakawa. We work with all of these groups, and we engage professors and staff and grad students from these university partners you can see. And all of them are very active in our program. We have people from Cornell who just got back doing an assessment of one of the largest private sector extension programs with the Coffee Federation in Colombia just last week. So people from all these universities are involved in our work. And we're a network. We share information and we disseminate it widely. We have an annual conference in Washington in early June around the time of the AIARD conference, another Ag and International Agriculture Conference in DC. The goals of the project are to help promote and strengthen agricultural extension systems, especially to increase farm incomes and enhance the livelihoods of the rural poor, especially women. As Roger talked about last night, women do a disproportionate amount of the work in agriculture, especially in places like sub-Saharan Africa, and we target many of our efforts at women. We work with systems. We're demand-driven. We respond to USAID missions, private sector organizations, country governments. Our definition of extension is quite broad. We're talking about a whole set of different adult education approaches, programs and systems that help farmers access not just knowledge and technologies and information, but also help them link with markets, help them link with researchers, education institutions, agribusinesses, all those things. And also that help farmers and their groups develop their own capacity, their own organizational capacity, their own management skills and practices. If you know much about the history of the U.S. agriculture development, you know that farmer organizations, cooperatives, have been a really instrumental instrument, an institution in development, and we see that in many places around the world. India, for example, has some amazing cooperatives, and so that's part of what we're talking about, helping those grow, helping those develop. I don't have time to go through this, but the point of this is most Agriculture Extension Systems focus on the top left quadrant, talking about extension for staple crops, so your maize, your rice, a lot of extension efforts kind of get stuck up in that top left quadrant. But we're also talking about process innovations, where you're helping farmers intensify and diversify their farming systems. You're working with groups, also engaging women directly in those groups, and teaching and working together on family nutrition, family planning, hygiene, healthcare, those things. The bottom right corner is about developing farmer group capacity. It's absolutely essential to help them work together as groups and then link markets, be able to market together, be able to address the quality concerns of supply chains, to take advantage of those opportunities. And then NRM in the bottom right corner, natural resource management, conservation agriculture, all those things around soil health, around water quality, water management. If you get stuck for extension up in the top left corner, you're missing so much of what's needed. The key components of our project, we have three main ones. Teach, we disseminate different modern approaches and best practices around extension. We have a set of training materials and technical notes. We learn is applied research. We work with teams all around the world doing action-oriented research. And then apply is country-level assessments and plans to strengthen systems. We work with governments and USAID missions. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about our work with ICT. We've done a bunch of country assessments of their entire extension systems: Liberia, Bangladesh, Mali, Rwanda, Malawi, Upper Egypt, Nepal, Tajikistan, Ghana. And here are some of the themes that we see in many of the countries. In ICT space, there's a lot of pluralism. The government often has a program, but you have a lot of NGOs and private sector actors. This raises a lot of issues around coordination, turf, and what I would call projectization. And so you have an effort that's funded by a donor, and as long as the donor funding is there, it's going great. But as soon as the donor funding stops, it's just going to wind down, and it's not sustainable. And all these kind of questions around how we finance interventions and where are we going with them are they're just huge in this ICT space. And then when you look at field staff, whether it's a government or NGO field staff, there's a lot of training needed. I'm not talking about farmers yet. I'm just talking about field staff. And then there's big questions about what's the government's role in this entire space. Oftentimes, they don't have well-functioning extension systems themselves, and they'll propose ICT as a fallback position, something that they see as smaller that they can manage from a capital. We don't see it that way, and I'll get to that in a second. And then the issue of sustainability of platforms. I'm talking about the financing sustainability. And in Ghana, for example, there's a lot going on right now, but it's not proven. It's not scaled. It's a lot of development going on. So that's one thing we're doing. And then another thing we're doing a randomized control trial of a Grameen ICT extension program that uses community knowledge workers in Uganda. And so there's 10 dairy hubs where they're getting this new extension program over the next few years. And we've randomized the extension program to 5 of the hubs, and we can observe the treatment of that extension program on both the farm performance for the smallholder farmers, they're mostly women, dairy producers, as well as the productivity of the hubs themselves. So we have a research project. This is a major effort that involves Ugandans, a Michigan State professor, myself, and some graduate students. And the CKW program is very novel, but it's expensive. The cost per farmer visit is prohibitively high to think about scaling this to the entire country. So these are some of the challenges in the ICT space. The ICT component of this CKW program is to give each extension worker, there's about 800, each extension worker a PDA, a smartphone, that they can make calls into an agricultural call center, get market information, answer plant pathology questions, a lot of other technical questions, and they get support from the call center for their own skills and abilities. So that's the ICT component. The other part of the ICT component is the Grameen program can monitor the performance of the extension agent. This is critical. They know where they are by locations, geolocations. Whenever they make a call, they know the location. So you can tell who's working, who's not working. They can pay people on the basis of performance. To me, that's the strongest thing about this technology, frankly. Okay, some other ones that we're involved in with Catholic Relief Services. They have a number of things. The Farm Book, it's a farm data and information platform. And a common extension strategy and adult learning strategy is to help people learn from their peers. This is on a PDA or on a notebook. You get farm information, you bring it into a processing center, and then you can benchmark different farms against each other and help teach people. How are you doing relative to your peers? Who are the top farmers? What are they doing? And you can use this information platform to teach and educate farmers. Very powerful. Very common with organizations in the United States. Hospitals, farms, a lot of different kinds of organizations benchmark. They also have the 5 skill sets. Basic training that is being delivered by the internet. We're now working with the government of Kenya to roll out that training system with their public sector extension agents and trying to lower the cost of delivering in-service training. A bunch of other things that I don't have time for. The lessons. Put the farmer right in the middle of your ICT strategy. Here's a woman in Liberia telling us, me included, what she needed. And she was direct and right to the point about what her group needed and what she wasn't getting. And when you're thinking about ICT, a lot of developers get enamored by the technology itself because they're tech people. We need to really focus on the farmer and focus about what does this service give of value to that farmer? Where's the value in it? And how does the farmer really benefit? And get farmer feedback, farmer input into it. It's very easy to lose sight of the farmer in these kind of projects. Second, look beyond farmers. There's a lot of different levels. A lot of the applications we see only are at farmers, yet they could strengthen other parts. They could strengthen organizations. They could strengthen field agents. So you can support extension workers, give them knowledge, enable them, empower them. You could use it for performance monitoring, like the Grameen are doing in Uganda, and build in performance in a highly distributed, difficult to monitor system. You can develop knowledge portals and repositories. Just open sharing of information is so powerful. A lot of NGOs hold on to their stuff so tight, and it raises the cost of doing development work. Make it open, open sourcing of materials and sharing. And there's some great platforms out there. We need more. And the training of staff. I also already mentioned the government of Kenya work. CRS in the Feed the Future project in Zambia has a large effort of this. 3, I think you need an extension program to deploy ICT well. Some cell phone and internet-based applications, you require a functioning program. And so you can't, it's not like you can only do ICT extension. And the 4th one, it's not a silver bullet. A lot of people speak about ICT for D as a solution to agriculture development program. I think a lot of that's just because they don't, and like the rest of us, we're groping in a lot of cases, and they find something that looks easy or implementable, and they fund it and do it. But in many cases, there's real questions about the business model, what happens after the project, and think of the things ICT can't do. It can't form farmers groups. It can't form cooperatives. It can't do high-touch market access. It can't deal with the land questions and access to land questions that are big in many places. It can't take many of those high-touch extension functions that require real group work and give and take and negotiation. So to wrap up, there's some great experiments, a lot of exciting developments going on right now. From the MAIS perspective, from my perspective in looking and working with many of these, I have some concerns about sustainability and the real need for farmer-centered ICT applications. And there's recurrent concerns about coordination, the role for the public sector, projectization along the way. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Our third panelist is Roger Thurow. He joined the Chicago Council on Global Affairs as Senior Fellow for Global Agriculture and Food Policy in January 2010 after 3 decades of work with the Wall Street Journal. For 20 years, he served as the Journal foreign correspondent based in Europe and Africa. His coverage spanned the Cold War, the fall of the Berlin Wall, release of Nelson Mandela, the end of apartheid, the wars in the former Yugoslavia, the humanitarian crises of the first decade of the century, along with 10 Olympic Games. In 2003, he and journal colleague Scott Kilman wrote a series of stories on famine in Africa that was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize on International Reporting. The reporting on humanitarian development issues was also honored by the United Nations, and they are co-authors of the book, Enough, Why the Poorest Starve in an Age of Plenty. In 2009, the two of them were awarded Actions Against Hunger's Humanitarian Award, and they received the Harry Chapin Why Hunger Book Award for their efforts. In May of last year, he published a second book, The Last Hunger Season, A Year in an African Farm Community on the Brink of Change. Mr. Thurow.
Yeah, we can put it up. Let's put up to one of those guys. Right. Thanks. Thank you, Chris. Thanks for everybody for coming. Even those who heard me last night. I apologize for my appearance. I'm actually, after this, I'm going to audition for the All-State Mayhem Man. I think he looks exactly like this, actually. This is what happened when hunger fights back. We spend a conference fighting against world hunger, and sometimes it strikes back. So no, I had a little fall or slip this morning, but I'm feeling fine, feeling wonderful actually. Yeah, and I figured, you know, there shouldn't. The other joke that I guess I can say is that, yeah, it's a rough neighborhood around here at Wheaton, so. You should see the other guy. But I also wanted to say, if it has to happen anywhere, great to happen at Wheaton, because as I was walking along the hallways, somebody stopped and said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Yeah, actually, I'm fine." I should have said, "What are you talking about?" And I said, "I'm fine." And he said, I fell, and he said, "Oh, you're the guy we prayed for this morning in class." And so I figured word is spreading fast, and it's a great thing. So that's why the healing is happening so rapidly. So thank you. So I'll kind of stand in profile, and you can see this. I just wanted to, just a couple of slides that I didn't show last night and a couple of points I didn't make, but I think fit really nicely in what Sri and Paul have just been talking about, and some technologies. This photo, that's Leonida, one of the farmers I follow in the book in the purple, sitting on the floor of her very humble house, mud and sticks frame of the house. The floor that they're sitting on is made of mud and cow dung, which is a good binding agent. And they're sitting on the floor, and they're shelling their maize. And yeah, they're using their hands. I don't even know if they have that implement. The implement works particularly good when the maize is dried properly, but when it's still a little wet, that there's some problems with that too. This is where this simple technology can make so much difference. So they're shelling. That's Leonida, her daughter, and then her granddaughter, the little one. So she's helping out too. But if you can see, that little black thing in the middle, sitting on top of the shells and on top of the cobs, is a cell phone. And as they're shelling, the kernels are accumulating, and they cover the cell phone, and Leonida kind of digs away and reaches in and then puts it on the top. And then at one stage, the cell phone rang, and I was startled by the ringtone because it was Flight of the Bumblebee. So in the midst of this very humble situation, all of a sudden, here comes Rimsky-Korsakov. And I figured, what a weird situation this is. So here's his cell phone technology, that's really great, and Paul was just talking about that, but also the limitations of it. Because on these cell phones and the agriculture properties and programs that they can accomplish with them, not only do they do their banking and their money movements by cell phone in the M-Pesa shops, but there's also a lot of agricultural extension help that can come across the phones. They can use their phones, just hit a couple of buttons, depending on their crop, and they get price information, not only at one market, but in all the markets in the area. So if somebody comes by their shamba, their plot, and says, oh, I'll buy your maize for such and such a price, it's like, I know the price here, or even the price in Nairobi. And I know you're the middle guy who's going to take it to Nairobi and sell it, so what are you doing giving me this price? So it can empower them so much with that. They can also get extension advice in terms of if they kind of put in and register when they planted a certain crop. This will tell them, based on a number of days, now you should be weeding. Now might be a time that you should do some top dressing with a little bit of fertilizer if you can. They can get their weather information on there as they're looking for both the planting season and then the harvest conditions. And Syngenta, as they offer an insurance plan along with the inputs that they sell, that insurance is built into the cell phone. So there's no paper, there's no insurance policies or anything, and you don't even need a cell phone. All you need is a SIM card, and you can take that and carry that with you and then go to the shop where you buy this stuff from, give it to the shop owner, and he'll do all that in there. And so your crop insurance, if you have some, or the insurance for the inputs, is you just carry it around on the cell phone shit. But here's the irony of all this. Unless it's accompanied by the things that Sri and Paul have been talking about, and that I talked about last night, and what One Acre Fund does, and on the whole realm and the whole front of agriculture development, a lot of these great innovations that they can do with their cell phones are basically useless. Because if they're not growing a surplus crop to be able to take to market, who cares what the price is? So you can get the price information, what difference does it make? You know what's going on in the various markets. What difference does it make? If you're not able to plant as much land as you have, even the extension advice is a minimal ability. And so all of these innovations and technologies and communications, they're great. And they open up all these new avenues for the farmers, and particularly the smallholder farmers, but they have to be kind of in this system of all these other things that are supporting agriculture development. So I think that's really important to remember. Just a couple of other photos. Where are they? We're going this way. Okay. So I think I showed this last night. This is Rizzo. She's doing the work. She's bending over, back-breaking labor. She has this short-handled hoe, and again, an invention from whenever it was, the Iron Age. And there's been no improvement on that. Again, considering the smallholder farmers too poor, too remote, too insignificant. So labor saving, health saving, innovations have basically been ignored or negligent for these farmers, because can they pay for them? Who cares if they need them or not? So that's where they are. They're in this kind of horrible time warp, even with their implements, and it's all hand labor. But I'll consider this. So no efforts on behalf of some of the poorest and hungriest people in the world, but for the world's leisure class. In golfing, we've invented and come up with putters, now they're controversial and may be banned on the PGA Tour, that these guys don't even have to bend over. Rizzo, bending over, we don't care. There's tens of millions of these smallholder farming women in this situation. But all our space-age technology, the titanium in the shafts, in the head so you can hit the thing for a mile, all that technology has gone into this because they'll buy it. These folks got money. Let's pay attention to them. Let's put all our research and technology into something that they can play a game better, as opposed to, gee, what'll make them more efficient farmers? What'll help us all in this world achieve this goal of having to nearly double food production by 2050. So we'll leave the slide on Rizzo, as opposed, I don't even know who this guy is. Could have done Phil Mickelson. I think he has one too. But anyway, but what all this comes down to, and just one other point that I want to make that I think is important. Everything that Paul and Sri were talking about, what I mentioned last night, what this conference is about, with the smallholder farmers at the center, kind of what it comes down to is providing choice, or the accessibility of choice and choices and decisions to these smallholder farmers. And I kind of go back to, in the book, following these farmers over the course of a year, and the year is 2011, and right away in January, they were at an initial training session with the 1 Acre Fund. And so it's extension training, and it goes on for a couple of hours, and it's planting in straight rows, and it's all about, and why it's important to weed, and why, kind of how microfinance works. The repayment process is important to repay so that it can be lent out to you again the next year. So why that all works, or why that's important, and then how that can be sustainable. And better to do that than just to give things away. But at the end of that initial extension session, the field officers who are running this, they pass around sheets of paper and pencils, or the farmers just take that out of their purses. And he says, write down on this sheet of paper, write down your goals as farmers. What are your goals? What are your ambitions? And so the farmers write them down, and then he says, exchange them. And so people are shown around. So I'm sitting there with Leonida. I'm watching what she writes down. Feed my family throughout the year, send my children to school, provide better health care for my family, repair my roof or something, diversify my crops, help others in the community. And then she passes it around, and then I'm seeing some other papers that are passed around. And goals, the top goal, 1A and 1B, interchangeable, feed my family throughout the year, educate my children. If we were to do that today, we passed around a list, it would be, we'd write the same thing down. Provide for our children, educate our children, renovate the kitchen, go on a holiday. Our list of goals, we'd have ands in between. I want to do this for my kids, I want to do this for the education, and this for the car, and this for a vacation. These farmers, what was remarkable to me is they were just listed. There was no conjunction in between. It was just a list. Because for these farmers, until they get to the point of being able to sustainably produce surplus harvests that then start giving them a choice, they're basically trapped in neither nor lives. We can neither feed our family through the year, nor can we provide the education for our children and pay the tuition fees, nor can we buy the malaria medication, nor can we diversify our crops, nor can I buy another cow, nor can I improve my house. As they say in the first year of these farmers, they have this for the first time. For the first time, they can go to a market. They can sell it. Now they're in an either-or life. I can feed my family throughout the year, as was the case with Leonida, and we saw with Rizzo. Oh, this is Sapporo. Was I saying that was Rizzo? And of selling the maize for the cow, or selling the maize for the education. Either or. I now have a surplus. I can feed my family throughout the year, or I can do the education for my children. The great goal that we should all have, the great goal of international development, is to introduce into their lives, into this list, these three small letters, A, N, D. These kind of smallest of conjunctions, and, to bring and into their lives. And if we can do that, that's a great thing. So they can kind of have the same choices. Feed my family throughout the year and educate my children, and buy another cow, and buy chickens, and improve my house. And that's what we were seeing last night with Rizzo's house all of a sudden, and Sapporo's house all of a sudden going up, and such great things. And so that's what I find is of international development. That's what's truly liberating, these choices. Choices liberate. Choice is freedom. And the decisions that they make, they're their decisions. We should listen to them, talk to them. How do you make decisions? And it's a fascinating process. So just to end, if we think of this world hunger problem, my goodness, it's so big. Nearly 1 billion people chronically hungry. We have to nearly double food production by 2050. 200 million stunted children in the world. How are we going to solve this? I bring it down to something that's very simple. These three letters, A and D. Let's introduce and into their lives. And then we'll see them really go to work. Thank you. Yeah.
We now have some time for question and answers. So if you have a question, you can make your way to one of the microphones.
Speak up. My name is Adam Sawyer, Hunger class of 2011. As I was hearing this, great presentation from all three. Thank you very much for coming. But a question was lingering in the back of my mind about does agricultural extension and the projects that you all facilitate or have studied, does it favor some farmers over others? Obviously, when technology is extended, some farmers receive that technology or the education or the organizational mechanisms at different times. So in the projects that you know about, do some farmers in some regions or locales, are they favored in the marketplace because of this? Is this a dynamic that you see? So how do you determine where to enter, where to extend, where to provide extension, and how do you time your projects as well?
Any of you guys?
I'm glad to take
Do more on the front lines.
a stab at that. First, we provide support services to country governments and to USAID agencies around the world. We don't, in general, implement large extension programs or small, but we work with partners. Some of them do, like CRS. And so targeting is critical, and that's what your question's about. And is it, what are the gender dimensions? What are the pro-poor dimensions of extension programs? A couple observations. One, extension agents, especially in the public sector, are captured all the time by wealthier farmers. You can look at surveys of who gets extension services in places like Mozambique and Zambia, and you'll just see a large income differential by farmers of who's able to get the extension services. So that's the first thing, that public sector extension agents get captured. And so there has to be real targeting. And there are ways to target the same way we target other interventions, by which groups we work with, how community engagement happens. But this is a real concern. And so it's not easy to generalize, but it's a concern, and steps have to be taken to make sure that poorer farmers are reached, especially landless agricultural workers in places like Nepal or North India. And how do you reach them? There are a lot of agricultural activities they can do, even if they don't own land themselves. And so that's all a part of it. And targeting has to be deliberate and aimed at that. I'll throw out one other thing that I saw recently. There's a tension in targeting between, in my opinion, some of the Feed the Future program designs that USAID has. Many of them are focused on 2 or 3 basic grain commodities. And often, if you look at the gendered nature of agriculture in West Africa, for example, those commodities tend to be controlled by the men. And so that's a weakness, in my opinion, of the entire country strategy for a major investment by USAID.
If I may just add to that, I totally agree, but I think the mandate is there for you to offer extension services without any discrimination, right? So, for example, in India, as I was talking yesterday during dinner, it's a government program. So an extension worker is a government employee, state government employee, or district government employee, and he's targeting a few villages, so he's assigned to a few villages. And his role is to provide this information to everybody across the board. But 2 things happen. One is that person doesn't have any reason to perform well. I guess it's a government employee situation. And the other is that the community itself, there are certain members who are educated who reach out to that person, who make that person do the job, whereas other people are not able to exert that sort of power in any way, or even, push for that, and they cannot demand it in some ways. And so they kind of get left behind. Another aspect is the women. So as I was mentioning, the women in that part of the world cover their faces with veils as soon as a man enters the room. So most extension workers, if they end up being men, the women are not getting that information. They're the ones on the field who can benefit. So those are the things that need to be addressed. And if they are able to demand for, to get better services, then both things on both sides will work.
I'm going to offer one other little anecdote. I spend a lot of time in the offices of senior officials in ministries of agriculture around the world. And who calls them? It's commercial farmers that are politically connected. And those, deputy ministers, division directors, these are political organizations, and they have to respond to those political concerns. And they will tell their agents, you need to go to so-and-so's rubber farm and help this guy. And everybody knows why. And they just, targeting is a real challenge, and some NGOs do much better. I think in some public sector systems that we work with, it's quite broken at the current time.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Carla Lovett, and I teach here in the history department, and previously had the opportunity to teach in the hunger program. Really enjoy the symposium every year, and particularly this year, my own personal background is growing up in Maine on a small organic sustainable farm. So that's my background. Something that was mentioned last night, and then also that you folks highlighted today, and that is the way in which technological dissemination doesn't seem to happen naturally. And I was wondering, very curious about why that is. I know, for instance, that in prehistoric context and in very early historical contexts in Africa, some of the very earliest examples we have of metallurgical technology and the ways in which metal is being used and reworked using fire comes from African contexts and then is disseminated elsewhere, including into Europe and the like. And so what would be some reasons? Is it political? Is it economic? Is it cultural? What are reasons why in current context or in recent historical context is this kind of technology information not being disseminated?
I would say kind of all of the above. I mean, so the politics, and as we were talking about, things get bottled up in bureaucracies. There's kind of political PowerPoints that will, for whatever reasons, be kind of favoring that dissemination in one area as opposed to another. But I think economics, and particularly from the private sector, I think they're kind of disseminating the technology to the areas where they can make money and where the profit incentive is. And until you start also seeing these smallholder farmers as customers and clients, there's no inclination to do that. So probably the most aggressive and the most successful entrepreneurs and companies in Africa are the telecommunications companies and the cell phone companies. They've realized that those farmers, it's this technology that will really help them in their lives, and that these smallholder farmers really want this technology, and they'll pay for it. And that's what they've found, because otherwise, if more than 50% of the population in many African countries are smallholder farmers, how limited is their market? And so they've taken that initiative, no, they should be part of our market. So they go out there, and here's this wonderful technology that they then take forward. And unfortunately, kind of from the agriculture private sector and the agro industry, there hasn't really been that incentive. You'll also find so far out in the bush and in the really remote areas, they'll have cell phones, but there'll also be Coca-Cola available, and Pepsi, and Guinness beer, and the local beer. That's because their distribution methods, their revenue projections and things, their marketing strategy is to reach everybody. So I think Coke's strategy around the world, their slogan is within arm's reach. Why hasn't that been also the marketing strategy of say, the seed companies and the egg companies? And then the government problems then with just a total collapse of the extension services in so many countries, particularly in Africa.
I had a couple comments on that. I think we need to be careful not to overgeneralize. And that's a problem with short talks. But you don't need my book-length manuscript on this. Things like cell phone, motorbikes, beer, all these things are widely available, and so are some agricultural technologies. We need to be careful. But in thinking about the spread of ag technology, I would first look at what we call the enabling environment in the country. It's, as Roger mentioned, the politics, but you can just look at roads. Look at the state of rural roads in much of Africa. This creates an enormous disincentive to any investment in agriculture. And it's demonstrative. We can see it in empirical studies of what happens when a road is improved into an area and the agriculture investments that are made and the growth and the family incomes that increase because of it. So you can look at the enabling environment. Also part of that would be the policy environment. In some countries, still the overall agricultural policy environment is pretty deleterious for agriculture. And then in some countries, take a Liberia, for example, agriculture just has a very tough time competing against some other industries for key inputs like labor. Like in Liberia, mining is booming, and it's very expensive to get labor. Men traditionally provide much of the labor on farms, and women can't get men to till and prepare buns on rice farms because many of them are either in Monrovia or else working on artisanal gold mines in the middle of the bush or on large-scale iron mines and other mining projects. So I would look at the enabling environment and also think about your farmers. They're very risk-averse for good reason, and they're extremely cash-constrained. And one of the great things about cell phone technology is it comes in most African farmers I run into, they don't have minutes. They get minutes when they need minutes and stuff like this. And they have little deals worked out where they can receive 2 rings and they know who to call and that kind of thing. And so these are people with very, very little money to spend. And so that's another part of it. But a lot of innovation is happening. I think some domestic companies I'm talking about Africa now. In South Asia, it's already quite vibrant. But in Africa, a lot more is happening in the private sector to disseminate technologies through market forces, market channels.
Yeah, just to add to that, you have reverse engineering happening, right? You hear all these stories about how there's echogram or cardiogram that you create to check your heart. GE has developed one in India for taking it from village to the people. People can't come to the hospital. And it's like a handheld thing for $400 or something versus, I don't know, $1 million that it costs in a hospital here to get that equipment. So that's reverse engineering, right? You develop something from there, and that's eventually going to come here to the developed world. And similarly, like John Deere is developing tractors that are for India, for the small farms. So you cannot take the big ones we have here and try to sell them there, right? So as the countries like all the BRIC countries and countries like India and China really become our core markets, and that's where we see the growth potential as these farmers, get to be middle-scale farmers at least, where they can use machinery, or they form cooperatives where they can rent, these big machinery instead of buying individual pieces. Industry will go there, the technology will develop for what is needed there, so it's driving it.
Hopefully we can interact quickly over one last question. Someone's waiting.
Thank you so much.
Okay, sorry, I only have time for one. So go.
Okay. Last night, Mr. Thurow, you shared this statistic about needing to double food production by 2050. And I wonder if does this account for how much loss there is through efficiency and what your 3 take on technology with transportation and storage and even just education about cooking things in a better way, like what experiences you've had abroad with that sort of technology?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Yeah, I think the need to nearly double food production, you see the estimates kind of anywhere from kind of 60% to sometimes seeing like a 100% increase. That's why I kind of always the journalistic hedge of nearly can include anything. But I think the storage and the wastage is like really low-hanging fruit. And I think that those would be included in those numbers. I mean, it's just adding food, not necessarily food that needs to be produced, but then making sure that the food is produced, actually comes to market and actually is consumed. And so in Africa, it'll be, 30 to 50% of food routinely goes to waste before it even gets off the farm. Because, as Paul was saying, the road system is horrible to move it. The storage facilities are woeful. So there's a lot of wastage that goes there. And kind of this really troubling symmetry is on African farms and farms in the developing world, the wastage will be 30, 40, 50% before it even gets to the table. Here in the United States, we waste 30, 40% of the food that we consume, or the food that we prepare for consumption, and we just don't eat because it's too much. And so basically we kind of end the wastage on both ends of the line. I think that would go a considerable way, and we know how to do that. It's low-hanging fruit. And I think in terms of agriculture development, storage and building better storage systems, that's kind of the next holy grail, because that also gives farmers choices to hold their grain longer, to get a better price when they're able to sell it further away from the harvest. And so, yeah, and then the cooking things and everything, I think there's all those things factor into being able to add to the food that's available on this planet.
Quick response from either of the panelists?
Yeah, I think when we think about where do we need to be in 2050, there are a lot of different variables in that projection. And we know we need to keep on increasing our productivity. We need to, sub-Saharan Africa is a key target because of how unproductive it is compared to what its potential is. So there's a lot of science and work that has to happen there. But there's some other big threats, climate change being perhaps the most important one, that affect water availability and soil health in major agroecological zones around the world. And depending on what happens with climate variability and climate change over the next 40 years, that will have a big part of it, and how we can adapt to that increased variability and those threats. And so that's another area where we need to be working now to avoid those kind of problems.
Sri, any comment? Well, unfortunately, we're out of time, and I know I could listen to these kind of conversations for hours and hours, and hopefully we can take advantage of having these great speakers here. Please join me in thanking them for joining this panel. Thank you. Great stuff, thanks.